Most of you, I presume, have seen Michio's various television shows on the Science Network. He's been on the media quite a bit recently with the tsunamis, and especially with the problems with the nuclear plants there. I heard him the other day talking about just a few particles of plutonium and lung cancer and all this kind of scary stuff. And he is a professor at City University of New York. He's one of the founders of string theory. He's the author of numerous books, including Hyperspace and the Physics of the Impossible. His show is Sci-Fi Science, is the one that they've already shot, and they're in reruns now. And he was just telling me they're probably going to do a sequel to that based on this new book, The Physics of the Future. He's the host of 2 radio shows. I've been on both of them. They're great shows, Explorations and Science Fantastic. In fact, KPFK Radio is here. He's on KPFK Radio. I think that was one of the first stations you started on, Michio. So that's on Saturday nights, I believe, at 10 o'clock, talking about all various, AM, Saturday morning. It's on right now. Oh, he just did that. AM, okay. Anyway, he's on 140 different stations. If you go to his webpage, you can see the list of where the stations are there. The new book is The Physics of the Future, How Science Will Shape Human Destiny and Our Daily Lives by the Year 2100. I don't have to tell you, Michio Kaku is one of the great big thinkers of our time. This book is a great book. I've been reading the stuff about Type 1 civilizations and how we become a Type 2 civilization. Big stuff. Really interesting, but you already know that because that's why you're here. Please help me welcome Dr. Michio Kaku.
Well, after such a great introduction, I can't wait to hear the speaker myself. Well, first of all, today I'm going to give you a guided tour of the future. Now, of course, it's impossible to predict the future. I'm a physicist. However, what I've done is I've interviewed over 300 of the world's top scientists. These are Nobel laureates, directors of the major laboratories, and I asked them one question. Since you are inventing the future in your laboratory, what is your vision of the next 50, 100 years? Now, it's difficult to predict the future, of course. Let me quote from the great philosopher of the Western world, Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra once said, quote, "Prediction is awfully hard to do, especially if it's about the future." But we physicists love to make predictions. We invented the laser. We invented the transistor. We helped to create the first electronic computer. We wrote the World Wide Web. We created television. We created radar, radio, MRI scans, PET scans. We created the GPS system. We founded the space program. You name it, there was a physicist there. So now, we physicists believe you can actually predict out to billions of years. My colleague, Stephen Hawking, talks about the world trillions of years from now. So let me now quote from that other great philosopher of the Western world, Woody Allen. Woody Allen once said, quote, "Eternity is an awful long time, especially toward the end." So we physicists love to make predictions. So when we helped to invent the internet, one physicist made a prediction. He said that the internet would become a forum of high culture, high art, and high society. Well, today, of course, we know that 5% of the internet is pornography. But that's because teenage boys log on to the internet. Just wait till the grandmas and grandpas of the world log on to the internet. Then 50% of the internet will be pornography. So I got into this game when I was a child. I had 2 childhood heroes when I was growing up as a child. When I was 8, something happened which literally changed my life. My elementary school teacher walked in one day and announced that a great scientist had just died. Everyone was talking about the fact that Albert Einstein had just passed away. And they showed a picture of his desk. And on the desk was the unfinished manuscript of the greatest unfinished work of all time. So I said to myself, I was only 8 at that time, I said to myself, well, why couldn't he finish it? Why didn't he ask his mother? I mean, it's a homework assignment, right? I mean, what could possibly be so difficult that he couldn't finish in an afternoon? Years later, I realized that it was the unified field theory, the theory of everything, an equation 1 inch long that would allow us to, quote, read the mind of God. Well, that's what I do for a living. That's my day job. I work on string theory, and we think that theory is the missing unified field theory. However, I had another role model when I was a kid. Saturday mornings, I was glued to the TV set because Flash Gordon was on. And hey, I'll admit, I was hooked. I mean, ray guns, aliens from outer space, rocket ships, cities in the sky. What's not to love? And I began to become fascinated with the future. This was going to be my future. I would live in this future. But, you know, after a while, I figured out some things. First, I figured out that I didn't have blonde hair. I didn't have bulging muscles. And I began to realize that it was the scientists who made the whole series work. I mean, Flash, of course, he got the credit. But without the scientist, there was no rocket ship. There was no city in the sky. There was no ray gun. In fact, there was no program. And I began to realize that my two passions in life, physics and the future, were really the same thing. That to understand the future, you have to have a sound foundation in physics. Because physics created most of the 20th century. Why was Albert Einstein the man of the century? Because he helped to found relativity, the quantum theory. He came up with the photon idea. Modern electronics is based on Albert Einstein's photon principle. So I began to realize that they're really the same thing. And then when I was in high school, well, of course, President Obama today talks about the Sputnik moment. We have to get our young people interested in science. Well, for me, the Sputnik moment was Sputnik. So I said to myself, I want to be part of this new generation. I mean, back then, believe it or not, physics was sexy, right? Hard to believe. You watched The Big Bang Theory today, right? Anyway. So anyway, when I was in high school, a junior in high school, in fact, I went to my mom and I said, Mom, can I have permission to build an atom smasher in the garage? A 2.3 million electron particle accelerator in the garage. And my mom stared at me and said, sure. Why not? And don't forget to take out the garbage. So I took out the garbage. I went to Westinghouse. I got 400 pounds of transformer steel. I got 22 miles of copper wire. I went to the high school football field, put the 22 miles of copper wire on the goalpost, gave it to my mother. She'd run to the 50-yard line with the wire, give it to my father. He'd run from the 50-yard line to the 100-yard line, and we wound 22 miles of copper wire on the high school football field. Finally, it was ready. It consumed 6 kilowatts of power, generated 10,000 Gauss of magnetic field. That's 20,000 times Earth's magnetic field. If you were to walk by my atom smasher when it was on DC, it would pull the fillings out of your teeth if you got too close. Finally, it was ready. I closed my eyes, I plugged my ears, I plugged it into the garage socket, and I heard this sound, and then all of a sudden this huge crackle of electricity, 6 kilowatts of raw power dancing in the capacitor bank. It works. It works. And then I heard this pop, 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 pop sound as I blew out all the circuit breakers in the house. Well, the house was plunged in darkness, total darkness. And my poor mom would come home every day wondering, why couldn't I have a son who plays baseball? Maybe if I buy him a basketball. And for God's sake, why can't he find a nice Japanese girl? I mean, what's wrong with him? He builds these machines in the garage. Well, anyway, I went to the National Science Fair, and there was a physicist who immediately knew what I was doing. I was experimenting with antimatter. I took pictures of antimatter. I built the atom smasher to produce antimatter. The physicist immediately knew what I was doing, and he offered me a scholarship to Harvard. I owe an awful lot to him. His name was, in fact, he was my advisor throughout my college years. His name was Edward Teller. But that's another story. So today, instead, I want to introduce you to the next 100 years, as told to me by the scientists who are building the therapies. What about medicine? What about the economy? There are literally hundreds of predictions in the book, and I'll simply lay out the ones that I can fit into a 30-minute talk, okay? But let me say that my last book was Physics of the Impossible, talking about 1,000 years into the future, when we might have time travel. We might be able to have starships. We might be able to have teleportation, wormholes, bending space and time into a pretzel. That's the last book, Physics of the Impossible. This book, of course, is about the next 100 years, and I'd like to announce that as of yesterday, we just found out that my book hit number 7 on the New York Times bestseller list. When was the last time you saw the word physics on the New York Times bestseller list, huh? 2 books with the word physics on the New York Times bestseller list, right? Now that's a first. Anyway, let's begin. Let's try to predict the next 100 years by going backwards in time. Let's go back to the year 1863. 1863 was a time of the American Civil War. Most people were dirt farmers back then. If you had a horse, you were considered rich. Okay, if you had a donkey or a horse, I mean, you were like high class. And then Jules Verne predicts the next 100 years. He gets the size of the space capsule to the moon correct within 10%. He says the rocket ship would be launched from Florida. He says it would take 3 days to reach the moon. It would splash down in the Pacific. Everything was right. Now you may say to yourself, ha, a fluke. Lucky guess. Well, he did it twice. In 1863, he writes a novel so fantastic, so bizarre, that even his publisher can't publish it. It's too fantastic for the publisher. The novel is called Paris in the 20th Century. Remember, the year is 1863. In that novel, he makes these preposterous predictions. He predicts, in a time when most buildings were 1 story tall, he predicts glass skyscrapers in Paris. In a time when most people were lucky to have a horse, he predicts gas-fired automobiles. In a time when, you know, long-distance communication was basically yelling at your friends, he predicted fax machines, something like the internet. How did he do it? Well, it's well known. He was an avid reader of science. Anytime a scientist, engineer would come by, he would sit them down, pester them with all these questions. He did the best he could to interview the top people of his time. So I said to myself, that's what I'm going to do. Interview the top people. I've interviewed the top people for the Discovery Channel, the Science Channel, BBC Television, and my own radio show. And Michael Shermer is one of the great people that I quote in the book. So you can blame him. Now, imagine the world of 1900. And we're now going to imagine the world of 2100. Think back to your grandparents and great-grandparents. What were they like? My grandfather was in the 1906 earthquake. Flattened the whole city of San Francisco. For most people in 1900, life expectancy was in the 40s. People didn't live very long around 1900. You were born, you grew up, and you died. Life was a bitch. Most people were dirt farmers. I mean, forget about the kings and queens and dukes and duchesses of 1900. What was high tech in 1900? High tech was the telegraph, if you were rich. Okay? Life was short, life was brutish. Now, let's say that you today suddenly could meet your grandparents or great-grandparents of 1900. What would they think of you? What would your grandparents or great-grandparents think of you when they see rocket ships, GPS systems, atomic bombs, cars with 200 horsepower, for God's sake, the electrification of the world, what would they think of you? They would consider you a wizard. They would consider you a sorcerer, able to conjure up images from around the world. That's what they would think of you, your own grandparents, your own flesh and blood. Now, let's say you meet your grandkids or great-grandkids, and they come and visit you. How would you view them? Given the fact that technology is accelerating, not slowing down, in fact, it is exponentially accelerating, not slowing down, what would you think of when you meet your own grandkids and great-grandkids from the year 2100? Well, this is what I asked a lot of scientists. And they all scratched their head, and they pretty much said the same thing. We would view our own flesh and blood as gods, the gods of mythology. Now think back to your high school mythology class. Back then, we learned about Zeus, the man who could simply think about things, and boom, it would come to be. Thinking was the way you would rearrange your room, rearrange reality, just by pure thought. And hey, there are perks being a god, you know. One of them is a perfect body. Who wouldn't want that? A timeless body. And then chariots. Gods had chariots that take them off across the sky. And would you believe it? We're finally going to get the flying car at last. Okay? And Pegasus, the flying horse, will be able to play with the nature of life itself. And remember that these are our own descendants, our own flesh and blood, if we were to meet them today. Of course, there's also a morality tale. If we have the power of the gods, will we also have the wisdom of Solomon? Because what did the gods do with their free time? Most of the time they were seducing each other, tripping each other up, making fools of each other. We have to make sure that we have the wisdom of Solomon to go along with the power of the gods. On the right, we have Loki, the god of mischief. And he helped to bring down heaven. He created Ragnarok, or the twilight of the gods. So wisdom is not necessarily guaranteed just because you have power. So let's begin. Let's now talk about the next 10, 15 years, 50 years, and 100 years. Starting with computers. This is Moore's Law. Simply says the computer power doubles every 18 months. The wealth of nations depends upon this logarithmic curve. It's a straight line. Look at that. Straight line. You can predict computer power out to the next 10 years. This means that when you get a birthday card in the mail, the birthday card sings, "Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you," when you open it up, right? There's a chip in it, right? That chip has more computer power than all the Allied forces of 1945. Hitler, Roosevelt, Churchill would have killed to get that little chip. And what do you do with that chip? You throw it away in the garbage, okay? Your cell phone today has more computer power than all of NASA when they put Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong on the moon. In fact, when I see the computer power of what they had in 1969, you almost cry, okay? Oh my God, I'm gonna get in that bucket and go to the moon? How much memory you got? Oh, we have like, what, 100 kilobytes of memory? And you're gonna go to the moon on 100 kilobytes of memory? Today, kids have gigabytes of memory, for God's sake, okay? Now, in 2020, just extend the curve. It doesn't make it genius. Extend the curve. In 2020, chips will cost a penny. That's the cost of scrap paper, a penny. Now think about it. Where do we find electricity today? Electricity is under your feet. Electricity is in the walls. Electricity is in the ceiling. We don't even think about it. Electricity is everywhere and nowhere. And how do we measure electricity? We meter it. Think of water. Where is water today? It is under your feet. Water is in the wall. Water is in the ceiling. And how do we measure out water? We meter it. In the future, computers will disappear. They'll be under your feet, in the walls, in the ceiling. And how will we pay for it? In the cloud. Just like running water, just like electricity, just like paper. In fact, every decade, a new revolution because of Moore's Law. In the 60s, mainframe computers were almost as big as this room. The military, banks could afford computers. In the 70s, it was mini computers, computers about the size of this podium here. In the 80s, it was the PC. In the 90s, it was the internet. In the 2000s, it's called ubiquitous computing. Chips leaping out into your cell phone. Chips leaping out into your car. When a chip goes into a typewriter, it's called the word processor. When a chip jumps into a cell phone, a telephone, it becomes a cell phone. That's called ubiquitous computing. Now, let's talk about the next several decades. In the next decade, we will have advanced sensors that will detect cancer 20 years before you get a tumor. And beyond that, computers controlled by the mind itself. So this is the internet. Where will the internet be in the future? Remember, the Pentagon did not create the internet just so that children could have Facebook and communicate with each other. The military did not create GPS just so that mothers can find their kids. They were war-fighting devices, devices that to fight a war. They were male-dominated devices that dominate over the Soviet Union. These were very male-oriented devices. Today, the internet is female. It is 51% female, in fact, to be precise, and it's about touching people. So we realize that inventions can have all sorts of warlike intentions, be very male-dominated, but today, the internet is all about touching people. And that, of course, is rocking all the Middle East. So let's talk about where you're going to find the internet. You'll find the internet, first of all, in your glasses. So when you see people in the hallway or at a conference like this, your glasses will identify who they are, print out their biography next to their picture, and if they're speaking Chinese, translate from Chinese into English as they speak to you. Okay? How many times have you been at a conference and you say, who is this person? Who is this person? I know this person. Jim, John, Jake, who is this person? In the future, your glasses will say, it's Jim, stupid. Remember, how many times do I have to tell you? You've only met this guy 3 times this year. It's Jim, okay? And let's say you're looking for a job, and you don't know who the important people are at a cocktail party. In the future, you will know exactly who to suck up to at any cocktail party. Very important. Now, if you don't want to look like a refugee from Star Trek, in the future, they'll be sexy. Kids, children will love this technology. You blink and you're online. Fashion models will adopt this thing. What? You're not hooked up to the web. Your home office, your home entertainment center is not there in your glasses. Fashion models will make it fashionable. Emails, movies, files, teleconferencing. But there's a defect. Let's say you don't wear glasses. Let's say you don't like glasses. What are you going to do? No problem. We will put the internet in your contact lens. So when you blink, you're online. And who will buy these first? Students taking final examinations. I tell you, man, college kids will be lining up to get this thing, right? Oh, do we have to know the amino acids, sine, cosine? That'll be great for science. Science is not about memorization. Science is about concepts. It's about principles. The facts and figures, you should know some of them, of course, but a lot of this stuff is just useless memorization. So it'll be good for science. And if you are an artist, you will love this, because you'll simply create things by moving your hands like this. You'll be able to rearrange your sculptures, rearrange your artwork as you move your hands, and then print them out or actually mold a 3-dimensional object from them. So artists will love this thing. Architects will love this, because architects will be able to create a gigantic building, and if they don't like the towers and the rearrangements of the skywalks, no problem. You simply move your hands around and recreate an entire new creation. So artists will love this. Architects will love this. Tourists will love this. If you're in Rome and you see all the ruins of Rome, there's nothing left. I was shocked when I went to Rome. I said, where's all the marble of Rome? Then they told me that the Vatican stole most of the marble to build the Vatican. So if you want to see the ruins of the Roman Empire, visit the Vatican. That's where all the marble is. I was shocked, okay? So in your contact lens, you will resurrect the whole Roman Empire in your contact lens. The military is putting money into this thing. The Science Channel flew me down to Fort Benning, Georgia. I put on the military's own version of this. It's a little tiny eyepiece. You flip it over, and then in a second, you see the entire battlefield. Enemy forces, friendly forces, airplanes, everything, the internet of the battlefield, right in your eyepiece. So, hey, this is going to be big. You realize this is called augmented reality. Now, children love virtual reality, right? They play games, monsters, demons, aliens, right? That's virtual reality. Augmented reality is for adults. It means you can communicate to any other human on the planet Earth. In fact, Google is already making enormous strides toward the universal translator. It's coming very fast. The contact lens themselves will take another 10, 15 years, but it's coming. Prototypes already exist of this device. And you've seen this before. You've seen augmented reality before in a movie. Where did you see this before? Here's the governor of California in a very bad mood. Very bad mood. Remember how the governor would lock on to John Connor? The biography would be printed out, the location, the coordinates. That's augmented reality. So when you see something, reality imposed upon reality is virtual reality, okay? The military is also interested in this because this gives you X-ray vision. You can look through objects. Let's say, for example, that you're a jet pilot over Libya or whatever. You're riding a $10 million jet. And the enemy comes at you, and the enemy goes underneath your jet. You are dead meat. So what do? You put a TV camera underneath your jet. The TV camera shoots an image into your contact lens. And so by looking down, you look right through your own feet. You see right through steel because there's a camera underneath. This is great for motorists because in the future, if you have a blind spot, you'll be able to see 360 degrees because there are cameras in all directions shooting the image into your contact lens. So this is going to be big. You'll be able to see people's biographies, subtitles, have X-ray vision, recreate or tourist tracks. The Chinese have even taken a big step. If you go outside Beijing, there's a famous summer palace that was burned by the British and the French. That whole summer palace has been resurrected in animation. As you walk through the summer palace, you see the animation of what was destroyed in 1840. Architects will love this. Soldiers, prospectors, astronauts, they will love supervision. This is coming real fast. Now, what about the living room? What will the living room of the future look like? Well, chips are moving into everything. A chip in a telephone becomes a cell phone. A chip in a typewriter becomes a word processor. A chip in your wristwatch, well, there it is. Intelligent wristwatches, intelligent cell phones. Now, if you have a cell phone like I do, have you ever tried to type emails and your fingers are too fat? You can't quite get the letters right? You feel like stomping on your cell phone, right? No problem. In the future, you will scroll out paper that is intelligent. Even paper will become intelligent. This is called flexible paper. You will have a full-blown screen inside your cell phone, and it's called OLED technology, organic light-emitting diode technology, and your wallpaper will be intelligent in the future. Chips only cost a penny. Hey, that's nothing. The chips cost less than the paper in wallpaper on the right. There you see flexible paper that could be used as wallpaper. You know, if you have wallpaper and you don't like it, you have to remove it. Have you ever tried to remove wallpaper? I did that once. Only once. I will never, ever do it again, okay? You got to get a hot pot of hot liquid, pour it over the thing, melt the glue behind the wallpaper. Yuck. Well, in the future, when you want to change your wallpaper, you say, wallpaper, change your color. Wallpaper, I don't like this design. Change yourself. And that's how you will redecorate in the future. Isn't redecorating wonderful? Now, here's your wallet of the future. Your wallet of the future today has pictures of your loved ones, and they just sit there and do nothing. I mean, what a waste. In the future, you'll have full-blown motion pictures. Why? Because chips cost a penny in the future. Paper will be intelligent, and this is your living room of the future. Your living room of the future will be 360 degree wraparound. This is called the cave. Total wraparound 360 degrees. I had a demonstration of this at Fort Benning, Georgia. The military has one. When you run in any direction, there's an omnidirectional treadmill. You can never get off the treadmill in any direction. This is the holodeck of Star Trek. You don't have to wait for the 23rd century for the holodeck of Star Trek. We already have versions of this now. This glass here, this wall screen, will allow you to touch anybody you want. So let's say it's Friday night, you're all alone, you're a college student, no date. We all know what you do, you get stone drunk. In the future, you go to your wall screen and you say, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's available tonight? Your wall screen scans all the other wall screens of everyone else who's lonely, not doing anything on Friday night, and your wall screen knows the kind of person you want, personality and stuff, and sets you up. Then after a nice dinner, you go back home and you say, mirror, mirror on the wall. My date and I want to see a movie like Casablanca, except remove Humphrey Bogart's face and put my face instead. Remove Ingrid Bergman's face and put my date's face instead. You will be a movie star in the future, okay? Now this is causing a problem for the English language. Chips are being put into everything, including toys. And that's causing a contradiction in terms for the English language. Smart Barbie dolls. Another contradiction in terms is Microsoft Works. In the future, your window will be intelligent. Like I said, your grandkids are going to say to you, Grandpa, Grandma, you're telling me that you lived in a world where everything was stupid? I mean, glass was just glass. It just stood there and did nothing, okay? This is intelligent glass, okay? You simply go to the glass, the window, and say, I'm sick and tired of looking at that dumpster every morning. I want a river view, okay? No problem. Boom, river view, Taj Mahal, Eiffel Tower, smart glass, glass that is intelligent, and television that comes out at you in 3 dimensions without glasses. Without glass. Here's how it works. It's called lenticular technology. There are lots of vertical lines in that TV screen. Each vertical line is a prism. Think of a prism that is very, very long and stack them. Each prism takes an image and breaks it up into 2 images, one for the left eye, one for the right eye, and it gives you 3 dimensions without glasses. I tell you, man, this is big, and it's coming now to your living room. This is your office of the future. As we said before, when chips cost a penny, computers are for free. You'll simply scribble on things and then throw them away if you want, because it's the content that's important, not the platform. As you move from room to room, the scribble moves with you. All your files move with you in the cloud as you move from room to room, room to house, house to office, because the computer is nothing. Today, your office is built around the PC, right? Why? It's stupid if you think about it, because the PC is nothing. You can talk to things. You can scribble anything you want, anywhere you want. Scribble on the wall, scribble on the table. They're all intelligent. And this is your cubicle of the future. Your cubicle of the future will be 360 degrees. It'll be so beautiful, you'll never get any work done in the future. This is the car of the future. Look on the lower left. This guy here in the lower left has no hands on the steering wheel. This car drives itself. Compliments of GPS. You can locate the position of a car and let the car do the driving. I had a chance to drive this car. This car is made by North Carolina State University scientists. I drove in this car, and the Science Channel wanted me to drive this car. And I was driving the car. The cameraman said, "Okay, let go." And I said, "What?" And he said, "You know, let go." So I went like this. Okay? Here's your homework assignment for tonight. Drive your car like this. Okay? And you begin to realize this is non-trivial. This has radar in the fender. It detects obstructions, and it is safer than a human being. Some people say, "Well, I don't trust this." Well, do you trust your neighbor who's drunk? Do you trust your neighbor who's drowsy? Do you trust your neighbor who is all anxious and fidgety? Well, realize that with GPS, with radar, it has been proven by the military that you can actually navigate through city streets better than a human being. Google is spending hundreds of millions of dollars to perfect it in 8 years. In 8 years, you may simply have the option of talking to your car, and it takes off, hopefully with you in the car. Okay, now that's 10, 15 years in the future. Let's look a little farther down now. Let's talk mid-century. And the book, like I said, has hundreds of predictions, all of them based on experiments being done today. Remember, I am not a science fiction writer. I'm not a sociologist. I'm not a historian. I'm a scientist. Every single prediction is based on a prototype that exists today. Let's now talk about mid-century, when we control computers by thinking about it. Like I said, your grandkids will be amazed that you had to type, because in the future you simply want something and it comes to be. Here's how it works. On the lower left, we have the movie Surrogates, starring Bruce Willis. That's not Bruce Willis there, by the way. But he's the star of the movie. And in that movie, Bruce Willis controls a robot by mental telepathy, controls a robot. The robot is a duplicate of Bruce Willis, except it's perfect. Perfectly young, handsome, super strong. And eventually, you realize that your own body's decaying. Your own body's getting old and falling apart, but your double is perfect. So in the future, everyone wants to live through their double rather than through themselves. Then at the end of the movie, they turn off the machine. Then the whole population of the Earth suddenly finds out that they have a decrepit body. Anyway, then we have Avatar on the lower right, where the mind controls a clone. When that movie came out, the reviewers said, great special effects, but cloning and controlling it with your mind? Give me a break. It's not going to happen. Well, it already is. We now can begin to interface the mind with the machine. It's not scary. It's actually quite practical. In fact, here's a children's toy. This little boy puts on this helmet. Your brain is a radio transmitter, believe it or not. It's a milliwatt generator. The computer can recognize patterns and decipher basic patterns, shoots them to a device on the right, and actually can, quote, use the Force. So this is the Force of Star Trek, okay? So that's how children will communicate in the future, via the Force. So on the lower right, we have a stroke victim. This person is paralyzed. He cannot move. He is paralyzed and a vegetable. At Brown University, they put a chip in his brain, connected the chip all the way to a laptop, and this person can now, by training himself, do crossword puzzles, surf the web, write emails, answer emails, and he is paralyzed. This gentleman on the lower left is a vegetable. He was doomed to spend his entire life being spoon-fed by nurses, being just a lump on a log. This person can now engage in very intelligent conversations, do crossword puzzles, emails, video games, and on the right, upper right, you see the chip that makes it possible, okay? This is a direct interface with the human brain. By the way, I was at a reception for Stephen Hawking, my colleague, last year, and it's very sad. Stephen can only basically blink now and make gestures with his face. He's lost control of his finger. However, in that reception, I met Mr. Donahue, and I said to myself, aha, Professor Donahue is the leading scientist pushing this technology. So it's conceivable that in the future, if Stephen Hawking loses control of his eyes, he will then have a direct interface with a computer. Then he will truly be unleashed. Okay, now what about avatar? And what about surrogates and avatar? Well, in Japan, they have an EEG machine that hooks up to a robot. Wouldn't it be great to use this in an earthquake? Wouldn't it be great to use this against a nuclear power plant that's raging out of control? This is mind control of a robot. The brain is a radio emitter. The computer deciphers the message, then sends the message to a robot, and the robot then carries it out. This is still pretty primitive at the present time, but we need one of these things in Japan right now because we have 3 raging nuclear power plants about to melt down, and it's caused havoc in my life. My relatives are in Tokyo. They had to evacuate. They have young kids. They had to evacuate. They're now in my living room because of the chaos. If we had one of these things operational, they could make all the repairs in lethal radiation fields and not even blink. Unfortunately, that's not ready yet. Hold on. Okay, now, of course, you've probably read about this in the newspapers. You can also use this as a primitive form of mind reading, but I think it's been hyped up a bit. On the left, for example, is an MRI scan of a brain that's telling the truth. When you tell the truth, nothing much happens in your brain. But when you tell a lie, first you have to know the lie, then you have to create the cover-up, then you have to calculate the consistency of the cover-up with all the other lies you've been telling all these years. That's a lot of brain power. Your brain lights up like a Christmas tree. This is not foolproof, but it just goes to show you what we can do with this. And if you saw the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, Inception, photographing a dream, ha, said the reviewers. Believe it or not, we think it's possible. In Kyoto, in Japan, there's a group of people there who think they can photograph a dream. Here's how it works. When you dream, the visual part of your brain lights up, and we can see that with an MRI scan. Then you show a patient a pixel, 1 pixel of light. That creates a scan of the brain. Then you move that pixel, creates another scan of the brain, and then you move that pixel everywhere. Now a picture is the sum of pixels, right? That's all a picture is, the sum of pixels. Since this device will detect all pixels in any point, you can then recreate the image that you were looking at. So far, they've been able to identify geometric patterns shown to a person. You show a star to a person, and then the computer will say, it's a star. This means that at some point in the future, we might be like Leonardo DiCaprio and photograph a dream. Now, there's a morality lesson here. When you have the power of the mind to control things, you got to be careful. This is Forbidden Planet, one of my favorite movies. It came out in the 50s. There is a civilization called the Krell, so advanced that by thinking, they could control fantastic machines. They had the ultimate power, power without instrumentality. By thinking, they could conjure up anything they want. Any wish, any whim could be realized by thinking. They could create robots on the upper right. They could conjure images of anybody they want. But then one day, when they turned on their machine, the very day they turned on the machine to have the power of a god, they died. They died the same day they turned on this fabulous machine that allowed them to control everything around them. What happened? At the very end of the movie, they give you the answer. The answer is, the very day this advanced civilization turned on this machine, they went to sleep. And when they went to sleep, their dreams, their nightmares came real. Real, the savagery of their ancient animal past leaped out, and they committed mass suicide. So our lesson is, if we ever develop the ability to make our thoughts into reality, for God's sake, don't fall asleep. Now, let's say about things about medicine, because of course there are hundreds of predictions about robots, hundreds of predictions about space travel. Let's break it down to medicine. When this movie came out, Fantastic Voyage, the critics really savaged the movie, and they said, who wants to have Raquel Welch swimming in your blood? Okay? I mean, give me a break. Raquel Welch in a submarine coursing through somebody's body. Wow, let's talk about this. Caltech was the home of Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman was famous for creating nanotechnology. So today we're going to ask the question, how small can you make a computer? That's a question that was asked by Richard Feynman in the 1950s. How small can you make a computer? Well, here's a computer the size of an aspirin pill. It's an aspirin pill hollowed out, and you put a TV camera there with a chip, and you swallow it. It has a magnet. A magnet guides it down the gullet, takes beautiful pictures of your stomach and your intestine. We all know that middle-aged men hate the C word, colonoscopy. But this device will take pictures of your insides. This gives new meaning for the expression, Intel inside. So, how small can you make a computer? Well, I was shocked. This technology is moving so fast. You know that now we can create nanoparticles, molecules so small, they zero in on cancer cells and zap them. I mean, tell me, man, this is big. This is real big. Today, if you have cancer, chemotherapy is required. And what happens to you? Your hair falls out, you vomit, you feel awful. That's today. In the future, your grandkids will view chemotherapy the same way we view bloodletting and leeches. For example, how did George Washington die? They never explained that in history books. Who can tell me? How did George Washington, our most famous American, the father of this country, how did he die? He was bled to death. Bled to death by his doctors. Because back in those days, bad humor was the cause of disease, and that meant bloodletting, okay? That's how we'll view chemotherapy, because nanoparticles with 90% accuracy have zeroed in on cancer cells. Here's how it works. If I have a normal cell has holes on it, pores. They're very well defined and small. A cancer cell has raggedy holes, large, porous, raggedy holes. We can now make a nanoparticle halfway between the two. It is too big to fit into a normal cell, but it is small enough to fit into the large holes of a cancer cell. It flows right into the cancer cell, either delivers chemotherapy or delivers a knockout blow with a gold particle. I tell you, man, this is big. This is really big. We're talking about a new way to cure cancer. Of course, it'll take years to get FDA approval, blah, 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 but it's coming. And people want to know, well, what about before I get cancer? Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the cure for cancer. In the future, your toilet will analyze your bodily fluids, your sugar, your calcium, your blood, your salt, and so on, and tell you that you eat too much sugar, too much fat in your diet. Isn't the future wonderful? Even your toilet will tell you that you eat too much. And ladies and gentlemen, the word tumor may disappear from the English language. We have what are called DNA scans. DNA chips that are so powerful, they can pick out proteins, enzymes from 100 cancer cells in a colony. Now today, if you have a tumor in your breast, it's too late. It's really too late. They don't tell you this. You have 10 billion cancer cells growing in your body. It's too late. Surgery, massive surgery, destruction of tissue is required immediately. In the future, your toilet will say, we detected 100 cancer cells. You have 10 years to do something about it. Now, You know that Aretha Franklin is dying of pancreatic cancer? You know that Steve Jobs, founder of Apple Computer, is dying of pancreatic cancer? You know that Patrick Swayze of Dirty Dancing fame died of pancreatic cancer. We used to think that it kills you rapidly in 2 years. Very aggressive, hopeless case, fast-moving, aggressive cancer. Wrong. We sequenced the genes of pancreatic cancer. We now know that pancreatic cancer is a slow-growing cancer. Takes 20 years, average 20 years to kill you. But in the last 2 years, you feel it. For 18 years, it's growing inside your body, but you have no way of knowing. Evolution did not give us a method to detect cancer in our insides. So by the time it is 18 years have passed, it looks like it's aggressive, only because it's in the final stages of a slow-growing cancer. In the future, this will be our line of defense. These are called DNA chips. These chips use the same silicon technology of Silicon Valley, except instead of looking at transistors, they look at proteins, cells, DNA of cancer. Mass General Hospital, in 3 years' time, wants to market the first of these DNA chips to the public. It is accurate to 1 part in a billion. You take 1 billion blood cells, it'll pick out 1 cancer cell out of 1 billion. I tell you, man, this is big. This is real big. In fact, it is so good that in the future, if you suspect you have lung cancer, you'll simply blow on your bathroom mirror. Your bathroom mirror will pick up the droplets of your saliva and analyze for a broken p53 gene. p53, when it's mutated, is implicated in 50% of all common cancers. In the future, you will simply blow on your window, blow on your bathroom mirror, and it will tell you if you have lung cancer or not. I tell you, man, this is going to change everything. Compliments of what Richard Feynman introduced years ago, nanotechnology. And then, let's talk about Star Trek. Now, I was watching Star Trek the other day, and I said to myself, 80% of what's in Star Trek is not for the 23rd century. We already have it, except for warp drive, and that's what I work on professionally. Except for the warp drive, we have everything else. Talking computers, typewriters that type by themselves, cell phones, tricorders. Well, when the tricorder was introduced, the critics would say, oh no, no way. A box that could look inside your body? I mean, how does that work? A box that can detect disease? Well, it's coming real fast. The tricorder. On the left is an MRI machine. Huge, gigantic. I know because when I was in high school, I had a job at Varian Associates in Palo Alto. My boss was Paul Ernst. He won the Nobel Prize in physics for the MRI machine. That was my advisor. And then on the right is the world's smallest MRI machine. It's this big, built in Germany. And Scientific American interviewed them and said, how small can you make your MRI machine? And they said, well, we think we can get it down to the size of a cell phone. That's the tricorder. We'll simply pass something right over your body, have beautiful pictures of the insides of your body, because technology is moving real fast. Now let's say a few things about DNA. In the future, well, today, if you weren't to sequence your DNA, it costs you $50,000 to sequence your genes. Every single one, about $50,000. Well, it was announced last month that a company wants to make a machine costing $50,000 that will sequence anybody's gene that comes along. That's going to reduce the price down to maybe $100. I had my gene sequenced. BBC Television did a documentary about time. They took some of my blood, sent it down to Vanderbilt University, sequenced it, because I wanted to know whether or not I had the gene for Alzheimer's disease. My mother died of Alzheimer's disease. It is a horrible, horrible way to die. You spend all your life struggling, trying to put food on the table. Every day, a struggle. And then you want to enjoy your golden years. And then you lose your soul. You lose everything. My mother couldn't even identify me. She didn't even know who she was after a while before she died. And then BBC television put a TV camera right in my face, and they said, we're now going to tell you whether or not you have the Alzheimer's gene or not, okay? The APO4E gene, okay? So they announced right on camera that I did not have it, okay? My response was, now that doesn't mean you're not going to get it. It just means you don't have the propensity to have it. My comment was, the agony that I had to go through, all Americans, everyone on the earth will eventually go through, because in the future, this will cost $100. $100 to have every single gene in your body sequenced. And what are we going to do with this genome? One thing we're going to do is replace body organs with your own cells. This is an ear. It is an ear made out of sponge. You seed it with your ear cells, cartilage, and it grows into the ear. Your own cells grow into the ear, and then the sponge is biodegradable. It dissolves, leaving a perfect ear. From your own cells, we can grow bone on the left, ears, noses on the right. 4 years ago, we grew the first human bladder. A young girl had a deformed bladder. Scientists at Wake Forest University grew an entire bladder. Last year, an entire windpipe was grown. We can now grow heart valves, blood vessels, bladders, windpipe, and in 5 years, we will grow the first liver. So for all you alcoholics out there, take heart. Remember, Mickey Mantle died of liver failure. What killed America's sports icon? He couldn't get a liver. That's what killed him. In the future, we will simply grow a liver. What we're talking about is a human body shop. A human body shop. As we get older, we have organs that wear out. We'll simply grow new ones. That's all. And you're taking this even farther. Now we go mid-century with this technology. Mid-century. Here is a mouse on the left, and there's a mouse on the right reading Michael Shermer's column in Scientific American. The question is this mouse a skeptic or not? Well, I don't know, but the smart mouse gene has been found. This mouse goes through a maze quicker. It has better memory. However, it has a side effect. These mice are timid. In fact, they're actually afraid. Some people think that these mice remember too much. They remember too much, and as a consequence, they're very timid and afraid, rather than ordinary mice that forget like hell and go right through all sorts of hazardous situations. This is the Mighty Mouse gene. It allows you to bulk up genetically. Well, in Germany, there was a young boy who was born who was muscle-bound. Scientists analyzed this young boy in Germany and found that he had the same gene as the Mighty Mouse. So we couldn't call it the Mighty Mouse gene anymore. We now call it the Schwarzenegger gene. Okay? When this gene was isolated, the guy at the University of Pennsylvania who isolated it got a lot of phone calls. He hoped that doctors would call him with patients that suffer from, muscular dystrophy or muscle diseases. Wrong. Most of the people who called him on the telephone were bodybuilders. Professional bodybuilders who wanted to walk in the steps of the governor of California. Steroids are a problem for the Olympics. It turns out the enzymes and proteins involved in this cannot be detected using ordinary methods. One of my friends, Arthur Kaplan, is on a subcommittee set up by the Olympics specifically to see whether or not science can detect an athlete that has bulked up using genetics. This could be the future of sports. Now think about it. Would you root for your home team knowing that your home team is genetically enhanced? Think about it. I mean, we pay good money to see our sports team have the best coaches, the best training centers, the best training machines, the best everything. Would we also pay to see our team genetically enhanced? This is coming real fast, something that we have to think about. And The big one, the new frontier. Do we have to age? Do we have to die? This is a question that we scientists are now teasing apart. The aging process itself. We now know what aging is. Aging is entropy, error, genetic error, cellular error. That's what aging is. Take a car. Where does aging take place in a car? I mean, anybody, where does aging take place in a car? The engine. The engine is where oxidation takes place, carbon deposit, wear and tear in the engine. All the pistons move like that. Where is the engine of a cell? The mitochondria. That, we think, is where aging takes place. The mitochondria has repair mechanisms, but eventually the repair mechanisms fall apart. Then the cell gets sluggish. It goes into senescence and eventually dies. That's why we die. It is the second law of thermodynamics, the buildup of error. Cells get sluggish because of errors in their DNA. Now, some animals don't have that. You know that alligators and crocodiles apparently live forever? It's amazing. Alligators and crocodiles never get old. They're just as vigorous at 70 as they are at 2 or 3. But you say to yourself, now wait a minute, I got you there, Professor. My textbook says alligators live to be the age of 70. That's because the zookeeper died at age 70. Read the thing carefully. It will actually say we don't know what the lifespan of an alligator is because it's too long to be measured. They simply get bigger. So in the animal kingdom, maybe we don't have to die, okay? So how do we do it? Well, many avenues. One is caloric restriction, genetic intervention, blah, blah, blah. Let's take a few of these. It turns out that a chimpanzee is 98.5% identical to a human. 98.5% identical to a human. A handful of genes separate us from the chimpanzee, but we live twice as long. Think about this. A handful of genes has doubled the lifespan of a chimpanzee to create a human being. In the future, we will have the genes of millions of people. Everyone's going to have a genome, millions. Old people's genes, young people's genes, and we will subtract. By subtracting the genes of young people from the genes of old people, we will see where aging takes place. 60 genes have now been identified that regulate the aging process. There could be more. And using caloric restriction, we can even double the lifespan of most animals, starting with yeast, going to insects, spiders, going to mice, rats, rabbits, going to dogs, cats, and now primates for the first time last year. We can almost double the lifespan of any living organism. Humans are difficult because, of course, we bitch a lot and so on and so forth, right? Much more difficult analyzing the lifespan of human. We live too long. With animals, we can do it. And so the question is, what about the future? There's a whole bunch of different therapies that we are now investigating. Now, that doesn't mean we have the fountain of youth. Don't believe the charlatans out there saying we have the fountain of youth. We don't have it. All I'm saying is that we're closing in very fast. So it's conceivable that our grandkids, when they hit the age of 30, they may just want to cruise at age 30. 30 is a great age, right? But they may just want to stop at age 30 forever. Now, there's a morality story here. In Greek mythology, there is Eos, the goddess of the dawn, beautiful, immortal goddess, who one day falls in love with a human, a mortal who dies. So she went to Zeus and pleaded and says, look, Zeus, I'm a goddess. I live forever. My lover does not. Grant him the gift of immortality. So Zeus did. Zeus gave the gift of immortality to Eos's lover. But she forgot to ask for one thing: eternal youth as well. So her lover got older, more decrepit, decayed. He was falling apart, and he couldn't die. He just got older and falling apart. He couldn't die. So in the future, for God's sake, when we find the genes that control the aging process, let's hope that we can keep ourselves young, too, at the same time, okay? Well, this book goes on and on. Robots, the future of space travel. I can't simply talk about everything. So let me now wind up, because I have to sign books. I have to sing for my supper too, right? I got to sign your book. And let me just end on one final story, and then I'll get into book signing. My hero when I was a child, as I said before, was Albert Einstein. I had the great privilege of speaking at his Einstein Centennial back in 2005. My favorite Einstein story is this. When Einstein was an old man, he was tired of giving the same talk over and over again. So one day his chauffeur came up to him and said, "Professor, I'm really a part-time actor. I've heard your speech so many times. I've memorized it. So why don't we switch places? I will put on a mustache, I'll put on a wig, and I will be the great Einstein, and you can take a rest and be a chauffeur." Well, Einstein loved that. He hated giving the same talk over and over again. This went on swimmingly until one day, a mathematician in the back asked a very difficult question. And Einstein thought, the game is up. But then the chauffeur said, "That question is so elementary that even my chauffeur here can answer it." Thank you very much. A few questions, and then...
Fantastic. Sure, let's take a couple. You want to take a couple questions?
That's a few questions, yeah.
So I'll take the host privilege if you'd like to make a comment on Ray Kurzweil's prediction of reaching the singularity by 2029 when machines will achieve human-level intelligence and we can live forever.
Well, some people think that if this exponential curve just keeps on going, machines will take over. Some people are optimistic, some people are pessimistic. The pessimists say that our robots will put us in zoos. They'll make us dance behind bars, they'll throw peanuts at us and watch us dance, just like we do with bears today. That's the pessimists. The optimists say we will merge with them, we will become immortal, so on and so forth. Well, first of all, it's dangerous making precise predictions like this because Moore's law is going to collapse in about 10 years' time. I have a whole chapter where I discuss the collapse of Moore's law. Silicon Valley could become a rust belt. Silicon Valley, the symbol of America's prowess in high tech, could become a rust belt for two reasons. One, heat generation. Transistors will be generating so much heat you can fry an egg on them. They will melt if they become too powerful. Second, the quantum principle, as Feynman himself realized. Today, your Pentium chip has a layer 20 atoms across. That is your Pentium chip today. By 2020, it'll be 5 atoms across. When that Pentium layer is 5 atoms across, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle takes over. You don't know where the electron is anymore. It leaks out. So leakage and heat are the two things which could kill this chart. Now, I was in Switzerland last year talking to IBM Zurich, and I talked to the physicists there, and I mentioned that I think in 10 years' time, Moore's law could collapse. And they said no. They say it's collapsing now. The IBM physicists in Zurich, in fact, I'm going to be in Zurich in a few more days meeting them again, they said they see it now. Already, they can see problems. They are bumping up against the end of Moore's law. So I think it's dangerous making predictions that far about the precise nature of computer power when we may have to go to things like quantum computing. Quantum computing is not ready for prime time yet. Quantum computer is a computer that computes on individual atoms. The world's record for a quantum computer calculation is 3 times 5 is 15. Now, you may say to yourself, that's nothing. Any kid could do 3 times 5 is 15. Yeah? Go home tonight, take 5 atoms, and multiply 3 times 5 is 15. And you begin to realize how hard it is to compute on individual atoms. So we simply don't know. Now, I've interviewed everybody. So I interviewed Marvin Minsky, who is Ray Kurzweil's thesis advisor. And I asked Marvin Minsky, the grand old man of artificial intelligence, the man who almost single-handedly created it, what is your time frame? And you know what he said? He said, I don't make time frame predictions anymore. And I think with good reason, because so many times people in artificial intelligence theory made these predictions only to have these predictions go crazy. Look at the movie 2001. That was a definite year, 2001, right? I'd say that movie was off by 100 years. It take 100 years before we have another computer that is as fluent in human psychology, our habits, as that HAL in 2001. Also, you saw Watson, the computer, up against Jeopardy, and everyone was saying, uh-oh, the human race is in trouble. This robot beat two Jeopardy geniuses, right? It's all over for the human race. Well, ask yourself a question. What else can that machine do? Nothing. It is a one-trick pony. That's all it can. You know, your calculator, your cell phone can compute about 1 million times faster than you. But are you jealous of your cell phone? So anyway, I don't know when we're going to have a singularity, okay? Maybe by the end of the century, but not anytime soon, because our most advanced robot, the world's most advanced robot built at Stanford University and MIT, has the collective wisdom and intelligence of a cockroach. A stupid cockroach. A lobotomized, stupid cockroach. And that's our world's smartest robot. It takes them 6 hours to walk across the room, 6 hours to bump into things. And does that remind you of anybody you know? 6 hours to walk across the room? Okay, so we got a long ways to go. So anyway, I don't know when the singularity may happen. It may very well happen. Ray Kurzweil could be right, but I don't know the time it will happen. Anyway, I have a whole chapter on the singularity in my book. Okay, maybe one more question and then we'll sign books. Yeah. Okay, can I speak to what's happening in Japan? The fundamental problem here is that engineers never plan for the one-in-a-century event because it's not going to happen in their lifetime. Look at Katrina. Why didn't the Army Corps of Engineers brace those dikes to handle a Category 3, 4, 5 hurricane? Because it's not going to happen in their lifetime or their children's lifetime. And then it happened, you know, the next year. At Chernobyl, the year before the accident in Chernobyl, the engineers who built it claimed this is one of the world's best reactors. It'll withstand almost anything that's thrown at it. They designed for all contingencies. And then a year later, it melts down. Okay? In Japan, they planned for a tsunami. The wall at the Fukushima reactor was 15 feet tall. 15 feet tall wall. The wave that hit it was 25 feet tall. It went right over the barrier. And because this is a once-in-a-100-year event, where did he put the generators? In the basement. All the backup systems, every single one went to the basement, and the water went to the basement, shorted out all the backup systems. Now, you get any nuclear engineering textbook, and we have several at our college. Any nuclear engineering textbook, look at the last chapter. They give all the accident scenarios. Yes, the backup system will handle this. Yes, the backup system will handle that. But nowhere does it say what happens when every single backup system is knocked out. The point I'm making is they're making it up. They're literally making it up as they go along. They're totally in uncharted territory. 3 reactors have now suffered various degrees of meltdown. 70% core destruction in Unit 1, 33% core destruction in Unit 2. We don't know what's happening in Unit 3, but Unit 3 has plutonium. And plutonium is one of the most toxic chemicals known to science. And so we're in a situation where we simply are in totally uncharted territory. And that, of course, is going to affect the future of Japan. A huge chunk of northern Japan could become a dead zone. Now, in Good Morning America, I made a suggestion. What did Gorbachev do in 1986? He called out the Red Air Force. He realized utility was totally overwhelmed. You saw them spray water at the Fukushima plant? Didn't that look like a squirt gun, you know, shooting a squirt gun at a forest fire? It was pathetic, right? Gorbachev called out the Red Air Force. He put lead underneath the helicopters so the pilots could get real close, and he dumped 5,000 tons of concrete, boric acid, and sand on the Chernobyl reactor. That's what I think they should do. Sandbag the reactor. Bury it in 5,000 tons of concrete per reactor. And they should start now. End the misery. Because look at the economy. Look at the human suffering. My family had to evacuate. It's going to cause tremendous trouble for the destiny of Japan. So anyway, that's my particular attitude. The wheel has been invented. We know how to stop raging reactors that are beyond design basis. And that is, bury the sucker.